Hello and welcome to Everybody Has a Story with Jeff Seltzer. I am your host, Jeff Seltzer. Once again, I want to thank anybody who is listening to the podcast right now. If you're new to the podcast, thank you so much for finding it and checking it out and giving me a shot here. For those of you that come back and return and join every week, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. Gotten lots of great comments on Instagram and via our email address as well. Really excited whenever I see it. For those of you that aren't aware what they are, you can check us out on Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. Our email address is everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. My personal Instagram is at Seltzer77. For all things Jeff Seltzer, you can always check me out at jeffseltzer.com. Quick reminder, you can check us out on various podcast platforms, video and audio on Spotify. You can see us on Apple, iHeartRadio, Amazon, YouTube, Pandora, all these really, really cool places. So anywhere you can find a podcast, you can probably see us. I got some really great feedback about last week's episode, which was about Halloween Horror Nights. As mentioned, my buddy John and I went to Halloween Horror Nights a few weeks ago. Really, really cool. Also hit up Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween, which I'll be talking to Megan Fernandez in a few weeks about, probably Halloween week episode. So be on the lookout for that to pop up. Real quick, before I introduce my guest for this week, I wanted to shout out my wife, Beth Seltzer. So for those of you that aren't aware, today, as this podcast drops, is Monday, October 7th, 2024. For those of you that aren't aware, I was married, or our wedding was on October 10th, 2004. So this week will officially be our 20-year wedding anniversary, which is insane. I'm 47 years old, been married for 20 years. I've been with Beth now for about 23 years. So basically for half my life, I've been with Beth and then, eventually married to her, which is just a surreal thing to think about, right? I mean, life's been amazing since I've been with her. Love her to death. We've had a great, great life for the last 20 plus years, 2 awesome kids. So again, just really happy and really thankful for the life that I have, and super, super excited for, everything Beth and I have together, and excited for our journey that we've gone on and what's to come. So again, if Beth is listening, thank you as always, love you, and happy anniversary. With that said, wanted to introduce my guest for this week, Zach. Welcome to the show, Mr. Zach. How are you today?
Hey, Jeff, that was quite an intro. Mazel tov to you.
Thank you.
And Beth. That is amazing. 20 years. I have to tell you, my wife and I are celebrating our 3-year wedding anniversary this
Congratulations.
weekend.
Awesome.
Would have been 4, but COVID delayed us 1 year. We had to delay the party. And our anniversary is October the 1st, so we're taking this weekend to do a little staycation in the city.
Very awesome. Very awesome.
Funny that you should have an anniversary right around the same time. But congrats to you and Beth. That's awesome. 20
Thank
years.
You.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it's a crazy time of the year. So in full disclosure, my birthday is September 30th. My oldest daughter's birthday is October 9th. So while I did mention my wedding anniversary is the 10th, her birthday is the 9th. She's turning 17 this week, which is crazy because, as you know, in the state of New Jersey, when you turn 17, you can get your driver's license. So that's definitely an experience. Super excited to see her take the test. Hopefully she does well with it. I'm sure she'll do fine. But, to have a third driver in the house is just surreal at this point, right? You think back to when she was a baby and kind of see them when they're younger, to now fast forward to 17 years old. It's just mind blowing.
Well, I'll make the cliche joke to stay off the roads then in that case. It's funny that my wife and I 3 years, and what was I just going to say? You mentioned
your wedding anniversary. You're talking about am I talking about my daughter's license? October 1st is your wedding anniversary, staycation in the city.
Oh, you were talking about your birthday. That's what it was. So happy early birthday to you. And then I promise we'll get on to much more interesting topics. We won't just talk about boring dates and things like that. But my birthday, my wife's birthday is February 24th.
Okay.
My birthday is February 28th.
Oh, wow.
Our son's birthday is March 8th. So all of our birthdays are within 2 weeks of one another, and we're all Pisces. Oh. And he's definitely a Pisces because he does not want to get out of the bath. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. We're a couple of New Jerseyans here, and a couple of big wrestling nerds, and it's been fun seeing you around the convention circuit and getting to know you. And yeah, Happy to talk to you.
Awesome. Well, again, Zach, thank you for joining. So for those of you that aren't aware, Zach and I met, I'm going to say probably about a year ago or so, probably virtually. So for those of you that don't know, Matt Cardona and Brian Myers, former WWE wrestlers, Zack Ryder and Kurt Hawkins, they have a Patreon and a podcast where they talk all things wrestling action figures and collecting and just professional wrestling as a whole. For myself, I'm a long-term wrestling geek. I've been watching wrestling since I would say 1986. I think the first match I ever saw on TV was like Randy Macho Man Savage beating Tito Santana for the Intercontinental title. That's my first memory from wrestling. Zach, I think, is a few years younger than me, so he probably started watching a little more recently. But with that said, both of us are just old school wrestling dorks, I would say. So with that said, within that podcast, the Patreon, they also have a Facebook group, which is where, you know, people kind of like with like-minded individuals, like-minded interests interact. So via that Facebook group, we just started talking, and we realized that we had a bunch of different things in common. Specifically, we're both in Jersey. We both go to some of the same conventions. We both have some commonalities that some of these conventions are, let's say, run better versus some of them are run worse. We were kind of, you know, comparing notes on stuff like that. And then eventually, in talking to Zach, recognized that he used to work for WWE or World Wrestling Entertainment, which completely blew my mind. Really, really exciting. So I never actually got to talk to Zach about his experiences working there. So I wanted to use this opportunity to learn a little bit more about what he's done. So taking a step back myself, I used to work for a company that worked with M&M Mars. So from 2000 to 2002, I worked with M&M Mars, who at the time, between Snickers and Twix, were huge sponsors of WF at the time, now WWE. So we like Snickers Crunch presents WrestleMania, things like that. So through that, I was able to get access to some events, got into some things. Years later, I worked for Post Cereal, Post Foods. We had John Cena on the cover of Fruity Pebbles. So I got some ridiculously great experiences and some great just things I got to do through that, whether it be hang out with John Cena on the set for the day, filming a commercial, to some other just really, really crazy stuff. Like Stephanie McMahon came to our office, which for me as a wrestling fan was just surreal. To everybody else in my office, they're kind of like, who is this Stephanie person? I'm not really sure. So lots of different things like that. But with that said, again, I worked quite a bit with WWE. I don't know that I ever met Zach when I worked with WWE, but of what I heard, or it seems like we might have had some commonalities. So before getting into that, I want to get a sense of from Zach, like how, growing up, I guess, did you ever have a fantasy or ever have a thought that you'd work for them, or kind of like what was your mindset, I guess, initially?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When I was probably not until I was in high school or something like that, and I knew that their offices were right there on 95 in Stamford, Connecticut, which is not too far from where I grew up and where I lived. I grew up on the border of Queens and Long Island, big wrestling fan. So yeah, I think I always kind of wanted to do something in an area that I was a fan of or interested in. You know, that began with starting my career in television. When I was in college, I was an intern for The Daily Show with Jon Stewart.
Oh, wow.
And which I was a huge fan of, and just managed to work my way into their internship program in college for credit. Yeah, so I always kind of had an idea that it was possible. But getting the gig was absolutely a dream scenario, and it happened many years after I first applied to work there. When I was a senior in college, I applied to be a part of the writing team, the traditional TV creative writing team. You know, all the cliches. Creative has nothing for you, right?
Right.
And I wrote a sample. I wrote a script sample for that. I think it was actually a multi-part thing. I can't remember how long it was, but I was turned down flat. But I had done phone interviews there, and I was working with a recruiter there. And then several years later, when the opportunity came to work for WWE in a different capacity, worked with the same recruiter, and he had remembered me from several years prior.
Right.
So yeah, finally happened. It was the right fit at that time. This was 2010, I want to say 2011. Yeah, and then I was there for several years.
Nice.
Yeah.
So when you first originally, I guess, started applying there as a writer, like again, as a longtime wrestling fan and reading all sorts of things and hearing things, I was under the impression, or a lot of what I'd read was they were looking for more like traditional, like Hollywood writers, like or TV writers. did you get the sense they were looking for that and they didn't kind of, I guess, include you because you didn't necessarily have like that TV experience, or did they ever give you a reason why you weren't fit for the role, I guess?
I think I didn't get the role because my sample was trash. I think that's the real reason. But I was applying for a more junior entry level, straight out of college, creative
Right.
writing job, and I think the role was going to be more a gopher who could then work your way up, and just kind of be there, be in the room, and learn from other guys. But look, when I wrote that sample, I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, I think this is what they want, you know.
Were you writing? I'd love to read it at some point if you'd ever let me to, but if you still have it.
I don't know if I have it anymore. I could look for that. That's actually interesting. I should go look for it. Yeah.
Were you writing it more as like a fantasy wrestling thing? Like I'll tell you this. Like, so when I was in college, this is like the mid '90s, and I was super bored in the class. I was just telling Beth about this like a couple of days ago. Like, I would just start doodling on paper about like what my dream card would be. Like, okay, we start off with like Bret Hart against like the Undertaker, right? And then some wacky story. Like, was it kind of like, hey, as a fantasy from a fan, or was it like taking a step back and looking at it, like legitimately what could happen and kind of like what you thought they were looking for at the time?
No, it was an assignment. It was like a specific
Oh, so they were
assignment.
specific in terms of what they were looking for. It wasn't like, hey, give us your best. It was kind of like, okay, book SummerSlam, something like that, or write Raw for next Tuesday or next week or something like that. Is that kind of the way it went?
I'm in my Gmail right now looking for it because I thought to myself, well, now I have to. I haven't looked for this thing in
Of course,
almost 20 years, at least 15 years.
right.
Okay, so here it is.
Okay.
Okay, so here's the assignment.
Yes.
Oh, and oh my God, I'm looking at this email thread, and I asked the recruiter, "Hey, just want to make sure my fax went through okay." I swear to God, it says that in the thread.
That's great.
So it looks like the assignment began with like a cover page, like a cover letter from
Sure.
Stephanie McMahon,
Okay.
and then you have sample storyline guidelines. And you have to include the following: World Wrestling Entertainment superstars currently on either Raw, SmackDown, or ECW.
Okay.
You
So
are
we're
more than
talking
welcome.
ECW was around what, 06 to like
Yeah,
09 or 10. So we're talking probably around late 2000s, I guess, right?
this was 2007.
Okay. Yep. That matches. Got it.
It was the year I was. I'm looking at the thread. It was May '07. I graduated college that month.
Got it.
You are more than welcome to establish a new character within this guideline, in addition to using one or more of our WWE superstars. Reflect current WWE storylines to demonstrate your knowledge of our product and characters.
Okay.
One backstage interview, an in-ring monologue, and one backstage vignette, a scene between two or more characters that further develops a storyline and includes scripted dialogue. Finally, the sample must culminate in a wrestling match. In World Wrestling Entertainment, conflicts are settled in the ring. There are no guns and no knives, and there is no murder or rape. Samples should not include commentary. Please keep your sample length to a maximum of 10 pages.
Wow.
Samples will be judged on originality, creativity, and your knowledge of WWE characters and storylines. Thank you for your time, effort, and desire to be a part of World Wrestling Entertainment, Inc. So that was the assignment. And
so just real quick to call out. So I respect and actually get a kick out of the fact that they had to call out that, obviously write this assignment, book it, but make sure there's no killing, no guns, no knives, and no, sexual assaults of sorts. Like, it's just funny that they had to call that out. Although I guess if people watch the Attitude Era, which was like late '90s, you would have some of those. So I guess they wanted to make sure they weren't getting any, things that they felt problematic at the time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're just coming out of the Attitude Era. They're kind of in the heart of the ruthless aggression era, right?
That's right.
Yeah, here's my sample. So I'm happy to forward this to you after.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just forward it to me. I'll again, I won't replicate it, but I could post a couple of comments about it or whatever in the notes for this podcast. I'd be super curious to read about it. I'm sure many of our listeners would be as well. So,
oh my God, it is awful. It is truly terrible.
Look, I just on a side note, so I went to college in the late '90s. I went to Rutgers. I remember I had a class called "When Civil Wars End," and part of the class was I had to write a 20-page paper on why civil wars end. So we had to pick a civil war. So me being dopey and not wanting to do much work, figured the US was probably the easiest one to write about. I think, and again, this was like, on an old school computer or whatever. I think at the end I had about 7 pages of 20. So I think I spent the last 13 pages, playing with the font, playing with the margins, playing with the spacing, repeating things without contractions or abbreviations, and somehow I got to 20 pages. It was trash. Like, it was absolutely not good at all. But I guess if you read it, or if I could find it again, I could figure out why the U.S. Civil War eventually ended. So kind of that's where we ended up. So with that said, so again, awesome that you found it. I'm sure going down memory lane, seeing the assignment that you did trying to get that first writing gig. Per your LinkedIn, it looks like you were a digital producer at WWE from 2011 through February of 2015. Again, per your words, content creator for WWE's digital channels, web, social, YouTube, and streaming. Can you take me through, I guess, some of your responsibilities, some of the things that they had you doing when you were in that job?
Sure. Yeah, it changed a lot while I was there, and then changed substantially more in the immediate aftermath when I had left.
Okay.
And they formed a group called the AMG, which was the Advanced Media Group,
Okay.
which basically combined WWE.com, as it was called, WWE, and all the other WWE digital, like social, and with the network. So
Okay.
all content was under one group called the AMG.
So for those, real quick, so for those of you that aren't aware, in I believe it was February of 2014, the World Wrestling Entertainment launched the WWE Network, which for wrestling fans like myself was like wrestling heaven. Where basically, first of all, any wrestling event that probably ever happened, that either happened in WWE, WWF, or any company they ever bought, like ECW, WCW, would show up on the network. So it was basically, it was early streaming also. So it was 2015 or 2014, lots of stuff there. Additionally, all of the pay-per-views that previously you could pay 50, 60 bucks a month for were on this network as well, streaming live. And while previously you'd pay ridiculous money for it, once the network launched, it was about 10 bucks a month, which, again, for a wrestling geek like me, was a huge, huge bargain. So what Zach's getting into is the fact that around that time or not long after that, they kind of merged a lot of the different departments together. It sounds like to better support the network, because it seems like that's where most of the attention or energy was going to. Would that be correct?
I guess so. I had left when that was flooded.
Okay.
I was, I was hearing this from friends and former colleagues who were
Sure.
still there.
Yeah.
When I joined, the website was about to go under a massive redesign. And that massive redesign included splitting up all of the digital producers who worked for the site. My title was technically digital producer. Everyone was placed into teams. And most people were placed into the Raw team, the SmackDown team. I can't remember if there was an NXT team of its own or if they used members of other teams. And then there was a team that focused on like the company's CSR efforts and initiatives. And then I got the very lucky placement of being on this team called Classics.
Okay.
As a part of the redesign, they included a section of the website in response to something that fans have been asking for years, which was a separate website. In this case, it was part of the website dedicated to old wrestling and writing about the history of old wrestling, digging up old photographs, publishing old video clips. And remember, the internet of 2011 was very different than the internet of 2024.
Yes.
So it was much more primitive, less social based, even though there was a small social media team. It was very bare bones. So I think I was placed on this team with 4 or 5 other individuals who were known to be longtime fans or have an affinity to the history of wrestling. I think they noticed that in me really quickly after I started. And we started putting long form writing pieces together, video features, photo galleries of just related to the history of wrestling.
Nice.
And that team was, let's see, it was myself, 2 other colleagues who were team members, The leader of the team, who is now still very senior at WWE in digital content and remains one of my close friends,
Nice.
And Howard Finkel.
Okay. Very cool.
Howard was on the team. Howard, at that point in his WWE career, had obviously retired from regular in-ring announcing, and was an office worker full-time for the website.
Yep.
And the best use of Howard at that time was to be a part of classics. What better, right? So he would sit in our. He was literally just one of us. He would sit in our content meetings. He would make suggestions for pieces. He would plan out our content calendar with us, and Howard became one of my closest friends there. And I miss Howard a lot.
Yeah, which real quick, if I can interrupt, I told a story a few episodes ago, I think it was, where when I worked for Post Foods, I met up with somebody over at WWE headquarters for a meeting, and then he gave me a tour of the office. And for me at the time, I knew Howard Finkel worked behind the scenes, but I didn't recognize or know that he worked at a cubicle like a lot of the other employees and like just got stuff done, like Zach had just mentioned. So when I was walking around, he led me over to like Howard's cube, and like for me, I was just kind of completely marking out. Like I was blown away. I was like, Mr. Finkel, how are you? And like Howard was, and I'm sure you've probably seen this many, many times, the nicest person I've ever met. Like he was super cool, super awesome. I asked him I was like, hey, I'm a huge fan of yours. I've been watching you since I was a little kid. Can I get a picture with you? He was like, absolutely, let's get a picture. And it's funny, I think Zach and I talked about it one time that Zach sat near Howard. In theory, Zach might have been the person who took the picture. I don't know that for a fact. It was right around the same time. It was like January of 2013. So maybe not. But for me, like seeing, somebody that I saw in front of like, 10, 20, 30,000 people. I mean, I went to WrestleMania 17 in Houston. I think Howard might have still been ring announcing at the time. So he ring announced in front of like 70,000 people. Like for me to see someone go from that to just see him sitting in a cube and just like doing work, but being super happy and super nice about it, like that just blew my mind. And then seeing him a few times afterwards at WrestleMania Access and at conventions, he remembered my name every time, which to me just blew me away. Like this guy who in my eyes was like an icon, should have no idea who I am, but like he recognized me, gave me a hug every time. It was just really, he was just an amazing guy. Like I really, in the short time that I got to know him, really liked him a lot. He was great.
Incredible guy. And I have a bunch of stories about Howard, so many stories. And they're all fun stories that wrestling fans would flip out about. What I will say is the floor where we worked had very much a newsroom kind of vibe with very kind of low sitting cubicles. And that was very much the vibe of the office as well. Right. We'd pop up, we'd shout across the office. We always had the TVs going with wrestling on. And I doubt I took the picture because I was kind of several desks away from Howard.
Okay.
But there's no question about it that you walked by my station.
Right.
No question about it, unless I wasn't there that day for whatever reason. I'll skip a lot of my Howard stories. So you want to talk Howard stories, I'm happy to, but I have so many of them. But if we want to segue into figure talk, here's a good segue. How about this, Jeff? So
sure. So while Zach's getting up, real quick here too. So as I said before, we met on let's say a wrestling action figure Facebook group. So both of us love collecting figures. For me, the last few years, I mean, I've always collected figures since I've been a young adult, which is weird to start, but I didn't really have money before then. But more recently, my hobby's been buying action figures and getting them signed by the actual wrestler. Zach, I know, has a huge passion for the same. As we were at a convention back in, I want to say it was May or so, and he had a number of them that he had from like old school wrestlers he was just bringing to get signed, which look amazing. So I'm sorry, Zach.
But here's the difference. Here's the difference between you and I, Jeff.
Yes.
If I know two things about Jeff Seltzer,
yes,
it is A, the only punctuation you use are ellipses.
Correct. Big fan of the dots. Yes.
Love the dots. You'll never let a comma in your way.
Nope.
Forget it.
I don't trip over the comma. Just go with the dots. Absolutely. Keep going. It's almost like I kind of run out of like, I'm talking, and kind of the thought is there, but I'm not going to continue what I'm saying. So you can kind of figure it out. Right.
If anybody's ever texted with Jeff Seltzer, you know I am right.
100%.
The second thing I know about Jeff Seltzer is you will spend an enormous amount of money on getting things signed, and there is no one that you wouldn't get an autograph from, and any item that the major Bendy's company puts out, you're buying it.
So I'll say this. I think you're probably about 99% correct. There's a couple of, let's say, problematic living wrestlers that I probably would not pay for.
Name one. Name one. Say it out loud.
Ric Flair.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
Man, that's so sad.
No, I mean, it's one. I know he's a classic. First of all, I've never been a fan of Flair. It's very controversial to say. But with all the stories that came out, if I met him 30 years ago, maybe I would have gotten an autograph or a picture with him. But more recently, especially with more and more stories out, that Vince McMahon also. I mean, I don't know that I'd pay for a picture with Vince at this point. Specifically with the documentary that came out recently.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't do Vince at this point. I'll come back to Howard in a second. But since you mentioned Flair, so I'm going to turn my laptop to hopefully show you some of my shelf here.
That's cool. Very nice.
So I'm moving that out of the way because that I just spoiled that. But
it was a good one though. But we'll and keep in mind only about 1% of my listeners watching videos, so maybe we can describe what we're seeing as well.
So I've got a shelf here of a lot of my signed action figures, and I have to make very difficult decisions because I have limited space.
Of course.
But you mentioned Ric Flair, and I'm not the biggest Ric Flair. He was never my guy, right?
Okay.
I have my guys, and he was never really my guy. But I do have Ric Flair items that are some of the jewels of my collection. So let me just show you a few here. So for those that are listening, this is the Mattel. I think you were with me when I got this done.
Yes, back in Morristown, back in May. Yes.
In Morristown, yeah. So I had a few signatures on here already, and I got it completed at that convention in Morristown. This is the Hall of Fame 4 Horsemen 4-pack that Mattel put out with the 4 horsemen that were inducted into the Hall of Fame. So Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Barry Windham, and Tully Blanchard all signed by all 4 of them, and then their manager J.J. Dillon signed in the center as well.
Awesome.
One of my favorite pieces in my collection. I need to get a case for this. Then I'll show you this. So I have almost this entire set signed. It's the 1998 version of the WCW original San Francisco Toy Makers.
Very cool.
And I got the first one I got signed was Bill Goldberg was doing a signing at I Play America in New Jersey.
Down at Freehold. Yep, I'm familiar.
And so I said, I got to get something signed by Goldberg. So I said, I'll get his rookie figure signed because I love getting rookie figures signed.
Yep.
So that was from the same set.
Nice.
1998. This was Bill Goldberg's rookie figure. And when I got this signed, and Brian Myers recommended I get it done in yellow paint pen. I had never used a paint pen before. He was right on the money. It turned out awesome.
It definitely pops with the yellow. Love it.
And after I got this done, I was like, this set is awesome because it has these big windows, these big bubbles. They're perfect for signing. So a lot of people that know me in the collecting community know that I am now on this mission to get the whole set signed, except for the guys that have passed away, which I think are going to be impossible.
One would think, yes.
And so I have Ric Flair from that set right here. That's where that is.
There it is.
The only 2 of the living guys that I don't have are the Giant, Big Show.
Big Show, okay.
He'll be at the big event on Long Island in November. I should finally be able to get him done there. I have the figure unsigned. And the other is Buff Bagwell, who has become my white whale. Buff Bagwell has been advertised for multiple conventions that I was attending only to cancel last minute. So hopefully we'll get Buff Bagwell done one of these days. But there's always a fear that one of these guys will pass away before you get a chance to get their autograph. The last thing I'll show you on the Ric Flair thing is this is probably my favorite piece in my collection.
Okay.
Oh,
wow.
And it's one of the only things I have in acrylic, right?
Yeah.
So what this is the it's the Ric Flair rookie figure.
Okay.
That came out in I believe it's 1982 or 83.
Wow.
I might be speaking out of school there. I don't want to say the year because I might get it wrong.
It's pretty old. It's definitely early to mid 80s, right? We'll say.
But it's from the AWA set that was made by Remco, which are famously known as the first official wrestling action figures ever made.
Sure.
And this is, I mean, the card is it's in fantastic shape.
Looks great.
You rarely see them in that good shape. You see the let's see, the price sticker right there, which I love, the old school price sticker from James Way. It was on clearance, it looks like, for $2.
Super cheap.
It is unpunched, and for those not in the know, what that means is the little hole that it would hang on the store's peg.
Yes.
If the cardboard is still filling in that hole, figure collectors will call that an unpunched card, which are, depending on who you talk to, may be more desirable. So this is unpunched.
Yeah.
And it is signed by both wrestlers in the 2-pack. Larry Zbyszko, who signed it as the last AWA champion, and then Ric Flair. Nature Boy Ric Flair 16X, and he does charge more for that Nature Boy inscription.
Of course.
And I got 3 autographs from Rick that day. One was on Horseman, one was on this WCW figure, and then on this Remco. And I thought, well, if I'm going to get Nature Boy on one, it's going to be on this Remco to match with the last AWA champion inscription that Zbyszko left. So that's my favorite item in my collection.
That's pretty great. That's awesome to see. Thank you for sharing that.
And then, sorry to make you jealous, Jeff. And then what I was going to show you about Fink.
Yes.
So when we worked at the website, most of us who worked with Fink, when his action figure was released, his first ever action figure, which was in the Jakks Classic Superstars line, he gave everyone a signed version of it. And it was inscribed to them, to Zach, a great coworker, whatever he said, right? And it sat on all of our desks.
That's amazing.
Everyone who worked in the department who was there when the figure was released had that sitting on their desk. And at some point, I lost mine.
Oh no.
I don't know exactly when I lost it, but it was something to do with a move, either moving homes or apartments, or I think I might have had it on my desk at work at one of my jobs after I left WWE. I kept it as a part of my desk decor.
Sure.
And I think it disappeared when I left that job.
Oh no.
So that item has been a holy grail for me, even though it's not the one that was given to me, just because it's so obscenely rare, because Howard is no longer with us. I needed to have that item again. And thanks to the Major Pod group, thanks to, I believe his name is Kyle Yates. Thank you, Kyle.
Kyle
awesome. gave me a great deal on this, but honestly, it's a priceless item to me to have this action figure signed by Howard. And I need to find a good home for it to display in my collection.
So with that said, and again, working with Howard Finkel for me would have been surreal, right? Like seeing him on a daily basis, especially after you watch any old VHS or whatever of WrestleMania and he's there. And then working with him, it's obviously
can I interrupt you for a second and say one thing about his WrestleMania appearances?
Please do so.
You'll get a kick out of this. So even after he stopped ring announcing full time, don't know if you know this, but they would continue to invite him to WrestleMania to do the introductions when they do the Hall of Fame section of WrestleMania, when all of the inductees from the previous night come out and wave hello. Howard would introduce them up until very recently, before he passed, obviously.
Yeah.
And it got to a point where he would continue doing that, but they wouldn't show him on camera. For a while, they were showing him on camera. And I think it was 2014 or 2015's WrestleMania that he came back, and we all called it the real streak.
Yeah. Which
he had performed at every WrestleMania, from WrestleMania 1 to WrestleMania 30 at very least. And so we would say, who needs The Undertaker? This is the real streak.
So a funny point to that story then. So again, like I mentioned earlier, I was at the office in 2013, met Howard, saw him a couple times at convention shows, whatever. through work, I went to WrestleMania 2014 in New Orleans. So previous to WrestleMania, I went to WrestleMania Access, where they have some signings, they have some cool stuff. Legends House had just launched on the WWE Network. Howard Finkel was part of Legends House, which was awesome to see. Said hi to him, quickly caught up with him.
I'm getting something out to show you. You mentioned Legends House.
Very awesome. While you're looking for that, so part of the way that I got into WrestleMania in New Orleans was through work. So they gave us seats in a suite, but for about half the show, they took us down to the floor and let us sit like in the family section, like 8 or 10 rows back, like reverse camera side. So as I'm sitting there, I was sitting down there for the Hall of Fame piece. And as Howard leaves the ring area, I think he was in the dark announcing it, but he was there. He walks away from the ring. He looks over. He looks me right in the face. He goes, "Jeff, how are you?" Gives me a big handshake and then walks by.
Amazing.
Which, again, to me, I was like, this guy, again, should have no idea who I am. But every opportunity, he doesn't give up saying, "Hey, how's it going?" Like, he was super, super amazing guy.
Amazing guy. And again, I could tell you so many stories about Howard. Let me show you this Legends House piece that I've got. This is another one of my favorite things in my collection. I just don't rank it as high as
before you get into that, let me just kind of give background for those people listening who are still listening that aren't wrestling fans. So when WWE Network first launched,
we've lost them all.
I'm sure it's just me. It's just me, you, and maybe your wife. I'm not even sure at this point. So Legends House was a show that they filmed around the WWE Network time, whatever. Basically, it was back when like VH1 had the Surreal Life, they had Road Rules, Real World, stuff like that. So WWE decided to record their own, let's say, reality show. So what they did was they put a bunch of wrestling legends to live in a house together. So keep me honest here, I think like Howard Finkel was there, Hillbilly Jim, Jimmy Hart, Tony Atlas, a bunch of just like people who were well known from like the 80s and probably early 90s that maybe weren't wrestling anymore, but were names enough that they're like, okay, let's put them all together and see what happens. So obviously they had some creative conflict, some competitions, whatever else like that. Howard Finkel is one of them. And sorry, Zach, I just want to give a little background into what Legends House was. I think you wanted to share something.
Yeah, it was the real world for old wrestling personalities is what it was. And when Howard was off filming it, we would ask, "Hey, where's Howard? He hasn't been in the office lately." And the line we were given was, "Howard is on assignment." Because he wasn't allowed to talk about it. When Legends House it was filmed and then it was put in the can.
Because didn't they originally film it like to sell before the network existed? Like they tried selling it to other like VH1 or other stations, but just never got picked up.
No, as I understand it, it was intended to always be part of the network launch, but
it got delayed multiple times, right? Yeah,
right. The launch of the network was just heavily delayed.
Gotcha.
And when it finally came out, I was working for the website, and the website would do written recaps of every episode. That's what WWE did back then. I think they still do written recaps of Raw and things like that to some extent. And I was tasked with writing those recaps.
Right.
And Howard and I had a great relationship. So Howard gifted me this.
Oh, that's awesome.
This is an 8x10 photo of the full cast that was done as a promotion. And it is signed by all 8 cast members, 4 of which who have passed, and 1 who is living almost never makes appearances. That's Hillbilly Jim.
Right.
He almost never makes appearances, although one was just announced today that people are flipping out about.
Right. Yeah, so that's pretty insane. I mean, that's a great souvenir that obviously it commemorates her time there when this launched. But B, again, like oftentimes with autographs, it's a tough situation because a lot of these wrestlers that we get autographs of, obviously we all have a limited shelf life, right? None of us are going to live forever. So there are certain things that unless you get them signed at a certain point, may never get signed. Wrestler Kevin Sullivan, right? He's been around forever. He recently passed away. He has an action figure that came out about a year or 2 ago, something called Heels and Faces. It looks like an old school, what they used to call Hasbro action figures. Really cool. He didn't do a lot of signings. He recently did a signing back in like May or June and then passed like a month or 2 later. So situations like that, like if you didn't get it signed, you're never going to. And then obviously once someone passes away, if you want an autograph of anything, prices can go up, demand can go up, all that kind of stuff. So to have something signed by half the entire cast, where half of them are no longer with us, and obviously the other half are, let's say, older gentlemen. That's just a really cool thing that's going to be tough to replicate, and I'm sure there are very few of them in existence.
Yeah, so I don't know where you stand on authentication and that whole culture of autographing, but I love getting my pieces authenticated.
Sure.
I've said this, I think, either on the major pod or to the hosts before, that I kind of feel like a piece is not complete without authentication, even if you have no intention of selling it.
Sure.
So, somewhat recently,
yes,
I decided to get this authenticated.
Oh wow.
This is just within at least since COVID is when this was, and so I got it authenticated, and because so many of them have passed and the value is so high,
Sure.
a lot of these authentication companies will insist to not just do a basic certification, put the sticker on it and say this is who has signed it.
Right.
They need to give you what they call a letter of authenticity.
Oh wow.
So there are different companies do this, and I have three items that are required to have letters of authenticity. This is one of them.
Gotcha.
The other is my signed Series 1 Hulk Hogan Hasbro.
Oh wow, that's a great one.
The value of that necessitated a letter of authenticity.
Sure.
And then right behind me, I have the Three Faces of Foley box set that Mattel recently redid, and that's signed by all of Mick Foley's characters, and he also signed it. I asked him to do Mick Foley in the bottom corner as well.
That's really cool.
And when I brought it to be authenticated at the JSA table, one of the big authentication companies, they said, no, we can't do an authentication for you here. We'll take pictures of it, and then 10 to 12 weeks, we send you an LOA in the mail. So yeah,
and those are my. And what is an LOA?
It's a letter of authenticity. It is. It is simply that. For those that are listening, it's basically a flat paper document that is signed and notarized, and has a photo of your item on the letter, and then it includes details about the item.
Got it. So to that point, I'll say this. So from time to time, I do get action figures and things signed in person. That's kind of where I kind of almost prefer buying from websites like highspots.com, places that will include the authentication, whether it be via Highspots, via JSA, or whatever. Just because for me, I mean, most of these places or a lot of these conventions don't have on-site authentication. So it feels like it's a lot more complex versus if you buy it already authenticated. It feels like it kind of skips a step for me.
I don't know. I don't know if that's true. A lot of the conventions I go to do have JSA or one of their competitors on site. If it's a competitor that I don't feel is one of the that simply isn't one of the top in the industry, I'll probably forego it. And then what I'll do is I will bring previously signed items to a convention where JSA is appearing, because they make appearances frequently.
Do you have to bring proof or any kind of like whatever or documentation, or you shows them they kind of like match it up with previous autographs they've seen and say, yep, that looks good?
The latter. Yeah. You can bring proof. When I was getting my Hogan done to get the LOA on it, I showed a photo of Hogan signing it and then me and Hogan holding it up. So I think that didn't hurt. But yeah, for the most part, and that's why some of these companies are very controversial. Because all they're doing is they're looking for two things. One, they check to make sure it's live ink and not a stamp. That's number one. If it's live ink, what they'll then do is compare that signature to other signatures of that talent that they have in their database. And they'll look for very small nuances with a microscope. Mickey Mantle is a famous one because he makes his M's with this banana shape. And you'll hear sometimes like, oh no, the bananas look wrong on that Mickey Mantle. But yeah, so what I'll do is if I haven't gotten items authenticated, I will put them in a giant tote bag. I'll bring them to a convention where JSA is set up. I'll go to that table first to drop off all my items and fill out the paperwork, make my way around the convention for the day, because it takes a couple hours for them to complete. And then I'll come back and pick up all my items. And I actually have a pile of stuff sitting next to me because I was at GraniteCon in the Granite State of New Hampshire last
Okay.
weekend. And the authentication service that they had on site there was not one of what they call the big three. So I said, you know what? I'm going to save my money on this rinky-dink outfit here, and I'm going to wait until I can get to a show where JSA is. And those, by the way, those big three
Yes.
are JSA,
Okay.
PSA, and Beckett.
Got it.
I'm typically against any authentication otherwise. I have a couple of things with High Spots authentication and Pro Wrestling Tees authentication. They send a little certificate.
Sure.
I think it's kind of baloney. So what I always do is I get it re-authenticated. Yeah.
And what do they usually charge for something like that? Is that something like $10-$20, or is it pricier than that when you get something authenticated?
It is, so there are a couple of different answers to that.
Sure.
Typically, if you're getting something authenticated at the show,
yes,
it is very standard for them to do a show signer special for $10.
Got it.
You see that almost all the time. If you're getting something authenticated after the fact, it depends on the talent. And most talent that I get authenticated, most wrestlers are $20.
Got it.
Hulk Hogan, I think, was, even if I wasn't getting the LOA, was more because he's a bigger name.
Sure.
And I know that guys who are passed away also cost substantially more. Not always substantially, but more.
More. Got it.
Yeah. And you fill out a little form and
got it.
It's pretty easy.
Cool. Awesome. A lot of great stuff on action figures and getting autographs. Did have a couple more questions for you before we sign off for the day.
Okay.
So working in WWE headquarters, obviously you saw lots of, let's say, notable names walking through the offices. Obviously, I'd imagine interviewing people and stuff like that. Did you ever get like starstruck or like, I guess we'd say marked out when a wrestler would walk by, or you'd have to interact with them, or kind of like, how was that experience for you?
A couple times. But before I went backstage for the first time, one of my colleagues said to me, remember, you will never forget the first guy you see with his shirt off. And he was absolutely right. I will never forget it. It was Ted DiBiase Jr., and he looked like $1 million. I wouldn't say I was necessarily starstruck of Ted DiBiase Jr. What I will say is being around Cena was special. But John Cena and I also developed a good relationship where it became more friendly. I'm trying to think who else I was maybe starstruck by. My reputation at the website was kind of a no fear reputation that I kind of wasn't afraid of asking anyone for a couple words.
Nice.
So it's rare that I was starstruck. What I'll tell you, when Warrior came back to the company, what they would do after making amends with wrestlers who had previous falling outs with the company is they bring them to the offices.
Right.
And they do the version of the ESPN car wash where they have them meet with departments across the company.
Sure.
So there we were sitting in this conference room with Warrior.
Right.
And he was wearing a jacket and tie. And he's
no makeup or anything, I'm sure, just like a normal guy, right?
No, he looked how he did when he was inducted, right? The gray hair, the goatee, and beet red face.
Right.
And, he was not well. Obviously, he passed away very soon after that. And I remember we were all kind of looking at each other like we weren't starstruck. We were more like uncomfortable.
Sure.
Because we were like, this isn't the Ultimate Warrior. This is just some beet red man.
Right.
And it was like kind of sad. I did at Madison Square Garden when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, interview Donald Trump.
Okay.
That was definitely interesting. Whatever you think of him politically, he was a very nice guy.
Nice.
He was fun to talk to, and he was more than happy to give me a few words.
Very cool.
And immediately after I finished interviewing him, I turned around and Arnold Schwarzenegger was right there because
That's surreal, right?
he was inducting Bruno Sammartino that night. And
Right.
because I had just finished interviewing Trump, I was actually the one who introduced the two of them, and they shook hands.
Wow.
Uh, Also, when Bruno Sammartino was being inducted into the Hall of Fame, I had found out that that was happening before it was announced, and I was tasked with writing the piece for the website to announce it. And I was given a pretty good lead time, so I decided to read his autobiography. And I had become obsessed with Bruno reading this
Right.
autobiography. And the day that it was announced, Bruno and Triple H were doing phoners with different media.
Okay.
And one of my bosses came up to my desk and said, "Hey, do you want to interview Bruno?" I said, "What? When?" 10 minutes. You can use my office.
Awesome.
I was like, yes. Oh, also, Triple H is going to be on the line. Whoa. Oh, okay.
So for those that don't know, so Bruno Sammartino, former professional wrestler, announcer, he had some falling outs with the company. He came back. Triple H, again, longtime wrestler, and at this point was someone high up in the company as well. So Triple H wasn't just like, hey, you're going to interview and talk to a wrestler. This is someone who was fairly senior within the organization.
And he had famously brokered the deal to
Right.
bring Bruno back.
Gotcha.
And the way that he brokered the deal was leaning into the fact that he was trained by Killer Kowalski, who
Right.
was a former colleague and friend of Bruno's.
Yes.
So I was definitely starstruck on that phone call. And the couple of times,
was that your first interaction or conversation with Triple H, or had you had any kind of interaction with him previous to that professionally?
it's a great question. I don't remember.
Okay.
But I had multiple interactions with Triple H, and I would say that each interaction I had with him, I was fairly starstruck. He was
Yeah.
definitely he's so much larger than life in so many ways. But he and I also developed a really great rapport as well, and I have a lot of
Nice.
stories about him. What I will say is the first time I was ever backstage, I mentioned the Ted DiBiase Jr.
Sure.
story, but just being backstage
Yeah.
and seeing what goes on, that was definitely a starstruck kind of moment.
Sure.
And it was also a big moment in the company's history. I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and Barclays Center had recently opened, and I
Yep.
was living at a 10-minute walk from Barclays Center.
Okay.
And WWE was doing their first event at Barclays Center, which was the TLC pay-per-view in 2012. And I told some of my bosses, I said, "This is my WrestleMania." For WWE to come back to Brooklyn
That's
and
awesome.
be
Yeah.
able to walk 10 minutes to the show. I
Yeah.
mean, that's incredible.
Right. Yeah.
So they let me go work that show as the first time I ever went backstage. And there were all kinds of great matches on that
But that was
show.
the one
But
where the Shields had their first match, I think, right? It was the
it was
three of them
right,
against, was it Ryback,
right. It
Daniel
was
Bryan, and somebody else? Or
and Kane.
somebody? Yeah,
Yeah,
Kane, right?
yeah. Yeah, it was the Shield's first match.
Right.
And it was Cena versus Ziggler with the Money in the Bank briefcase at stake in a
Got it.
ladder match.
Yep.
And Punk was the champion but injured, I believe.
Gotcha. Yep.
So that was definitely a big day.
Nice. Nice. Awesome. Well, Zach, this has been amazing. We are running short on time. So before cutting off, wanted to see if there's anything else you wanted to share or anything else you wanted to promote or support, or any way you want to say goodbye to everybody.
Nope. Go vote in November. Everybody needs to vote. Make sure you're registered. Make sure you know where your polling place is. To your right, and you need to vote.
Very well said. I would say exactly the same thing. Doesn't matter who you're voting for. Just, you've got a right as long as you're 18 or older in America and that you are registered to vote. Do it. Other countries you can't. Here we can. So get it done if you can. Super important. With that said, Zach, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry, do you want to say something else? Or
Mazel tov on 20 years.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Mazel tov on 3 years.
Thank you.
Of course. With that said, thank you everyone for joining. Once again, any feedback you want to send, please send it over to Everybody Has a Story Pod on Instagram. My DMs are open. If you want to be a guest, send me a note over there. You guys know where you can find us: Spotify, Apple, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Castbox, Good Pods, Pandora, all those places. You can find me at Seltzer77, jeffseltzer.com, email at everybodyhastorypod@gmail.com. Lots of great guests coming up, including my buddy Joey Silver, independent wrestling phenomenon, who we've seen in AEW, House of Glory, other places like that. He should be on in a couple of weeks. Again, Megan Fernandez to talk Halloween, actually not Halloween Horror Nights, Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween in a few weeks. If you want to be a guest, let me know. Besides that, have an amazing week, and we'll talk soon. Thanks, guys.